Hello, sir. So you are a pioneering force in the higher education landscape in India.
Slowly.
Yeah. So tell us something about your personal journey from being a partner at McKinsey to setting up three important education institutions.
Well, we could spend all our time talking about this, but I'll try to be brief. One relevant aspect of this journey is that I was going to be an academic. My career was to do a PhD and then join a university and be a faculty and spend my life doing that. But as often happens, I finished my PhD, I started doing some academic work, and then I realized that I hated it. I had chosen to be an academic, I didn't know what it meant when I studied. When I was studying to do a PhD, I really enjoyed it. I was very happy. And suddenly, when I had to do the job, I found that it was not for me. So I was very obviously anxious that now what do I do? I was also about 28, 29 years old. I was quite late in my life. I was married. So fortunately for me, McKinsey and Company, the management consulting firm, was looking for what were called non-MBAs. So I was treated as a non-MBA in a firm that only used to hire MBAs. I was in North America at that time. So I joined them. And I never thought that I would do what I do now. I never imagined that I would go back to education in a different avatar, almost. But several years later, there was a project we were doing in Malaysia, where we were working with the government of Malaysia, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, to transform the Malaysian economy into a knowledge economy. An economy that was more driven by software services. They had till then been a manufacturing economy. So they were heavily into making, and they were finding that their costs were rising, so they were not so competitive. They wanted to get into what was happening in India, which was software and IT. But then as we did the project, we realized that they didn't have software engineers, they didn't have IT engineers, they didn't have CS and computer science training in their universities. So then they said, okay, what should we do? And we said, it's important that you set up a university that trains graduates in the future technologies. We wanted to get into what was happening in India, which was software and IT. But then as we did the project, we realized that they didn't have software engineers, they didn't have IT engineers, they didn't have CS and computer science training in their universities. So then they said, okay, what should we do? And we said, it's important that you set up a university that trains graduates in the future technologies. We called it Multimedia University. That time the word digital or internet or some of the lingo that we now use, IT, was not there. It was called multimedia technology. So we set up Multimedia University, and I was very involved in the planning and the design of that because people thought I've been an academic, so maybe I know something about academia. Not that I was trained to set up universities. It's like saying a doctor can set up a hospital. You don't really know how to set up a hospital. But I learned that, and then, of course, that led to ISB as a idea that was being contemplated by some of us in India. So because I had done that, now I had some experience. I wanted to get into what was happening in India, which was software and IT. But then as we did the project, we realized that they didn't have software engineers, they didn't have IT engineers, they didn't have CS and computer science training in their universities. So then they said, okay, what should we do? And we said, it's important that you set up a university that trains graduates in the future technologies. We called it Multimedia University. That time the word digital or internet or Some of the lingo that we now use, IT, was not there. It was called multimedia technology. So we set up Multimedia University, and I was very involved in the planning and the design of that because people thought I've been an academic, so maybe I know something about academia. Not that I was trained to set up universities. It's like saying a doctor can set up a hospital. You don't really know how to set up a hospital. But I learned that, and then, of course, that led to ISB as a idea that was being contemplated by some of us in India. So because I had done that, now I had some experience. I wanted to get into what was happening in India, which was software and IT. But then as we did the project, we realized that they didn't have software engineers, they didn't have IT engineers, they didn't have CS and computer science training in their universities. So then they said, okay, what should we do? And we said, it's important that you set up a university that trains graduates in the future technologies. We called it Multimedia University. That time the word digital or internet or some of the lingo that we now use, IT, was not there. It was called multimedia technology. So we set up Multimedia University, and I was very involved in the planning and the design of that because people thought I've been an academic, so maybe I know something about academia. Not that I was trained to set up universities. It's like saying a doctor can set up a hospital. You don't really know how to set up a hospital. But I learned that, and then, of course, that led to ISB as a idea that was being contemplated by some of us in India. So because I had done that, now I had some experience. So that's when today I'm only involved in higher education. My whole career has come back to education, but not as an academic, but more as somebody who sets up institutions. So that has really been the journey.
Coming to our next question. So, sir, how do you see the impact of digitalization on education? And ChatGPT is a new trend. So, is ChatGPT going to change the game?
So those are two different questions. I think the digitalization of education is a good thing. It's a new way for all of us to learn. We will now have an additional way of learning. One is to learn in the classroom, the other is to learn online. Same thing happened when books started to come. In the 14th century, the printing press was invented. Till then, we didn't have books. Books were only available handwritten in the libraries of rich people and kings and monarchs. Ordinary people did not have books to study from. They would go and listen to the teacher and maybe write, but they didn't have books to learn from. So when the printing press arrived, suddenly books became available and it led to the massive expansion in education. Till then, if you wanted to study physics, you would only go to somebody and ask them to study physics. But when I was growing up in Patna, my physics teacher was not very good. So I studied from a book by Professor Resnick and Halliday from Purdue University. I had never met them, I had never been to Purdue, but I learned from the book. I think now you have classrooms, you have books, and now you also have online. So I think that is what has happened through the digitalization, and it's good because you will do your MBA, but tomorrow if you want to learn something about ChatGPT, you can go learn it online. Stop. It's like reading from a book. Now, ChatGPT itself, which is your second question, will change things as all technologies have changed. Some of you are not aware of the many technological changes we have seen, somebody like me has seen in my life. So, for example, when we used to work with computers, we used to have to punch holes in a card and feed it into the computer, and if you made a mistake, you come back and change the card and punch. Today, you don't even know what program is happening. You have facial recognition. You turn on your. 30 years ago, I used to work on computer vision algorithms where deciding by looking at an image of a face, where is the edge of a face and where is the room, used to take years of computing. Today, you can actually do facial recognition. So, technology helps with improving productivity. It makes us more efficient. Some low-end tasks or some tasks become now part of technology and they become automated. You don't have to do them anymore. So yes, productivity will go up. Some tasks you won't have to do, but there will be other tasks that you will have to do. Now people are talking about framing engineering. It's a whole different branch of engineering. How do you ask ChatGPT questions? How do you train ChatGPT is now the bigger challenge. So things will evolve. I don't think that when people say, oh, all of education is going to die, we don't need education anymore now that we have ChatGPT. These are people who don't really understand the capabilities of ChatGPT. One of the big flaws in ChatGPT is that it has not been trained for the last 2 years. It only has data up till 2021. Many of us know that ChatGPT actually turns out has mistakes, it has hallucinations. Equally, it's very good for certain tasks. I also use it. I have a subscriber, I pay $20 a month because I love playing with it. So, these kind of changes have happened before. They will continue to happen. One of your professors in the Convocation talked about when calculators first came, people were saying, oh my God, calculators. Though all education is going to change because people are going to start using calculators in the classroom, in the exams. How do people learn? They will not know how to add. We are still here. We are still doing education. Yeah, everybody uses now calculators. So maybe tomorrow there will be a world where people will be allowed to use ChatGPT in their final exams. The question for us will be, how will you test them? What kind of questions will you ask that will not test their ability to use chat, but to use their brains? How can you do that? I think that's a good challenge. I think we are all up for it. So that's how things are going to change.
So the next question I'll ask. I know you have answered it in the convocation itself, but still for the sake of interview, what do you think are the 3 traits essential for leading business and people in 21st century?
Yeah, so I did touch on some of these traits in my speech, but I will say that the 3 traits are the following. First is the ability to deliver, to perform, to make sure that every time you do things well. And that was the big trait that I focused on in my speech. Do well, do independently. So people are still going to expect you to get the job done. They will expect you to get the job done well. They will expect you to do it independently. They don't want you coming and saying, I don't know how to do it, or tell me how to do it. I didn't study this in Praxis, so they didn't teach me in the MBA class. So you'll have to figure it out. That's what people have always valued and they will continue to value. At work, in the professional workplace, delivery is the most important. Second, and I didn't talk about that so much today, but the ability to work with people is going to be very good. You can't. The problems of the future are going to be so complex and so complicated that you will not be able to solve them yourself. You will need help from others. You will have to convince others to help you. You may need to convince others of your point of view, so you have to know how to influence them. And you'll have to work with people and not be a jerk and not be a bad colleague or boss. And so I think that part is going to be very important. And the third part that is very important is, again, something I alluded to, which is you have to be very self-aware. You have to be constantly thinking about what are you good at, what are you not good at. How can you leverage your strengths? How can you improve on your weaknesses? And how to constantly learn and grow and improve yourself throughout your life, not just in the early stages, but throughout your life. Because the challenges that you'll get, including through ChatGPT, will require you to learn and pivot and change every few years or months. And that will need that you need to have a high degree of self-motivation, self-learning. So those are the three traits: the trait of leading performance, leading others, and leading yourself.
Okay, sir. So, my question would be, according to you, how do we remain relevant as professionals in this constantly evolving and increasing automated world?
So the question of relevance has been there even before. Again, it comes to my third trait that Ashwindar asked me about. And that trait is, one, what really drives you. What drives you may be very different from what drives me. So, for example, you may be very interested in, I'll make it up, the field of design. You may be a very creative person, want to do stuff that innovates, that identifies needs and comes up with solutions, that has certain aesthetic qualities around it. You may say that while there are lots of chairs in the world, you still think none of the chairs are comfortable. You may want to design a chair that is only meant for women. So that's knowing what is it that you really want, and that can change over time. But at any point in time, be clear about, this is what I'm very excited by. Similarly, my interest right now is in building educational institutions. I feel passionate about it. If somebody comes to me saying, "Come, let's do a startup in food," I'm interested. Or wants to do something to do with design, not interested. They say, "Okay, let's set up an educational institution in design," then I'm interested. So knowing what you are interested in first is very important. Second, I think you have to be aware not only of what you want, but what's happening in the world. How does that intersect with what you want? So if you're interested in design or I'm interested in education, then I have to keep abreast to your point about relevance. If I'm still thinking of the time when I was growing up and you're still thinking about the time you were doing painting in class, it's not going to help and you're not going to be relevant. So the way you stay relevant is by being aware. And I tell people that you must read. I know it's painful for a lot of young people to read because in school, in college, you're not encouraged to read anymore. You don't have the habit. So giving you a book to read is like painful. You can't get by a page. But I think it's the only way to stay relevant, to learn about what's happening in the world. Now, reading doesn't have to be reading. You can watch. There's everything now is video on YouTube. You can see a TED Talk. You can watch a podcast. You can see an interview. You're interviewing me because you want to put this out for other students to see, right? Somewhere you will do. Fairness. So you want them to read so that they can learn from me about what's happening in the world. So I do think that reading, watching, listening continuously as a habit is very important. And even if you find it a bit awkward or boring or difficult in the beginning, start small, very small, however small. Read a paragraph only. But the power of compounding, if you just grow it a little bit every day, till you maybe can get through a book, a thin book. Then say, okay, I'll read a book every 3 months. This year I read 6 books. Right? I think that's how you stay in touch with what you want and what the world wants. So that's how you stay relevant. That's the old-fashioned way. The new part of it is you can watch videos, you can wear your earphone when you are in the metro going back to the city and hear an hour-long podcast.
So, sir, beside reading, what advice would you like to give to young students like us?
I would only like to say that I don't know if you all realize but by doing a PGDM or an MBA, 2 years, you are actually getting into a new profession. It's the profession of management. A lot of people do this degree just because everybody else is doing the degree and it's a way to get a job and way to get a more higher paying job than you would have been able to get otherwise, based on whatever you did at your undergraduate level. And that is all true. But what is also true is that you are getting inducted into a new profession, just as a doctor does, or a lawyer does, or an architect does, or a chef does, or a bus driver does. And we often don't, as a pilot does, we often don't realize that you have committed to a new profession. And the new profession expects certain things from you. And those things are little things like showing up on time. You can't be in management and not show up on time. Getting your work in on time. Keeping people informed. These are things that most people are very casual about. As students, actually, we are very casual about. It's okay to bunk classes. It's okay to call later and say, "Main bimar ho gaya." No, these are very small things, but in the work and in the profession of management, these are very important. And I think you have to learn the discipline that for the rest of your life, you're going to be expected to do these things. You cannot be casual anymore. And therefore, as a profession of management, you have to keep up to date with what's happening in management. You know, a doctor that you go to get treated by, you'll only go if the doctor is really up to date on what is happening. And how do they keep up to date? They keep reading, keep going to conferences. So, the profession will require you also to stay up to date. The profession will require for you to take a genuine interest in the world of business. Now, many of you may find that you're actually not interested, like what happened to me when I became an academic. You may turn around and say, it's not very boring stuff. I'm not interested in profit, loss, company, business. That's a problem. It's just like a guy who's become a doctor and can't deal with blood or doesn't like to deal with illness. So one of the things you have to decide is whether you really like the profession. And if you like the profession, then you'll have to commit to spending time in the profession, learning about the profession, using the jargon of the profession, understanding the technical aspects of the profession. A lot of people use the word revenue, income, money in the same way. You know that in management you can't say that. The difference between what is revenue, what is income. Your mother may not know the difference, your friends may not know the difference, but you need to know the technical difference, the technical field. So the biggest piece of advice I will give you is to understand that this is a profession. It's not just something that gets you to a better place. And now that you're in the profession, you've made a big commitment. If you didn't think about that before, now you're stuck. You better learn it if you want to be successful. Don't take it casually and say, "Oh, ek aur degree, ek master's mil gaya." It's not that. It's actually a very big commitment. It's almost the same commitment that your friends or your sister or your brother made in class 12 to become a doctor or a lawyer or an architect. It's that kind of commitment you're making. So that's the thing that I would say. Take it seriously. This is not just another degree.
Thank you, sir. That's
Thank
all
you.
from my side.
All right, you're most welcome. Good questions.